Hello and welcome to another episode of the D.A.R.E podcast. I'm Miranda Brawn, the founder, host and producer, and we have an amazing guest today. And did I say that the D.A.R.E podcast is also in partnership with City AM? For those that don't know, City AM is an amazing publication focused on business with personality, and they have nearly 12 million global users. Now today we have a very dear friend of mine. Delighted to have Dr. Andrew Charles Palmer with us today. Welcome to the D.A.R.E podcast, Andy.
Nice to see you.
Good to see you too. I've not seen Andy for a very long time. So this is a way, the whole point of these podcasts is that they're also supposed to be very informal, real talk. We'll have some laughter in some places, but it's really deep conversations. And it's like you're having lunch, a coffee, dinner, and catching up with a friend. And that's exactly what we'll be doing today. We'll be catching up on air, even though we did cheat and we had a bit of a catch up before this session. So Andy, I always start at the very beginning. What were you like as a child and what were your career aspirations? And you grew up in Stratford-upon-Avon.
Yes, I'm basically born a Brummie from Birmingham, but from the age of 10 months old, we lived in Stratford-on-Avon, which is a nice posh place, I suppose. I went to a school in a place called Candid High School, which was a little way down the road, and left school at 15, basically, so very, very, very young. Wasn't much of an academic, didn't like school very much, and this might surprise, it won't surprise you, but may surprise other people. I was quite shy, and didn't like school because didn't fit into that group of basically you have to be vocal about what you want to do. So I knew from quite an early age, 14 probably, that I wanted to be an engineer. I was lucky enough that my father was an engineer and he'd done an apprenticeship, so I was aware of that route, even though certainly my school wasn't advocating going into engineering. It was advocating all sorts of other things, but engineering wasn't seen as a very good profession. But that's what I wanted to do. My dad had bought me an engine when I was 14 years old, and I was taking it apart and putting it back together again. I went for an interview at a company called Automotive Products at 15, and as I turned 16, I became an apprentice there for 4 years. So that's basically as I matured into an engineer. Maturity into other things came a bit later, because at the age of 20, I knew that I wanted to be the CEO of a car company.
And you did, Aston Martin.
If
you're going to choose a car company, let's just reach for the stars.
Yeah, and that was interesting because, basically what I grew up in a time that you won't remember, but the time of the industrial disputes, what was Red Robbo was the famous union representative. Austin Rover, as it was then, British Leyland, was constantly on strike. And
my dad had a Rover car back in the day.
Right. Yeah. And they weren't, honestly, they weren't terribly good cars.
Yeah, they weren't.
The quality was pretty poor. The relationship between management and the workforce was very poor. And as a little bit arrogant, sort of 20-year-old, I just thought, this is stupid. Both workers and management have an identical aim, which is, basically make money so you can employ people. And it struck me that the whole industrial relations issues was just absurd. I was having, because it was mandatory to be a part of a union in those days, I was what was called a closed shop. I was being taken out on strike so regularly, I just thought, I can do better than this, so I want to be a CEO of a car company.
I love that. And for those that don't know, I introduced Andrew Charles Palmer, Dr. Andrew Charles Palmer, but for those of you who don't know who he is an automotive executive and an engineer. He is probably more famous for being the former CEO of Aston Martin, the James Bond car, for those that don't know. And he's also been called the Godfather of electrical vehicles. And you also launched, and I think that's where your electrical vehicle really came into play, your passion for that, where you launched the Nissan Leaf in 2010 while you were the COO of Nissan. You also, while you were at Aston Martin, you launched their first SUV called the DBX, and also launched their first mid-engine sports car. But I know when it comes to gender diversity, and we will touch upon that in this conversation, you also were very, very vocal and active in terms of gender diversity and ensuring that senior women within the automotive industry got heard. I mean, I know we were both on the board of Switch Mobility, which is with the Hindagers. And for those that don't know, it's the UK's richest family in this country and within the UK. And we were both on the board there, and it was all about electrical vehicles. So we will get into that as well. But on top of all of that, Andy at the time was the CEO of Switch Mobility. He's also the founder of the Palmer Foundation. So not only is he successful in his own career, but he's also helping the next generation with apprenticeships and helping our next generation to have a successful career within the engineering industry. And that's how we met. We met nearly 10 years ago. I can't believe it. I had launched the Miranda Brawn Diversity Leadership Foundation in January 2016, and we met in February 2016. And this was when in the first month of launching, we had partnered with the Prince's Trust, and we were doing joint scholarships to help the Prince's Trust graduates, and most of them were entrepreneurs. And we met at, I think it was the 40th gala for the Prince's Trust, and this is where Kylie Minogue was singing. I remember I brought my mother as my guest, and she was dancing with Kylie Minogue, and Joanna Lumley. Is it Dame Joanna Lumley now?
I think it is.
Probably.
Yeah. I think we were on table 110.
Well, look, we won't go into that.
Near the doors.
We won't go to that. Don't spoil the illusion, Andy. But Joanna Lumley was there as the host, and she came to our table and was so charming.
Oh, you have an amazing memory. I've forgotten that. Yes,
yeah,
she did.
I remember. I
think she was selling raffle tickets.
Yeah, well, she said to my mother that she was absolutely beautiful. My mother is absolutely beautiful. And we shared a table with another very good friend. Can't remember his name right now. I haven't seen him for years. But anyway, that was when we first met. And this is the beauty about networking. Whenever you go to any event, you can network, you can meet someone, but it's the follow-up. And we followed up. We clearly were passionate about helping not only the Prince's Trust and supporting that, but also helping our next generation. And so you ended up being one of the first judges. In fact, all for the first few years of launching the joint scholarship with the Prince's Trust, you were a judge. You have been a supporter, you've been an ambassador. Any time I've ever asked you to do anything, you've always said yes. And I want to say on air, thank you, Dr. Andy Palmer, for being such a great supporter and such a great friend. And, you know, you are, when it comes to MLLI, you are one of those global leaders who actually do so much behind the scenes. It's not just in front of a camera, but you do so much to help others. So that's enough stroking your ego.
Absolutely.
And you know, and there's so much more. Like when it comes to, I was saying that I looked at Wikipedia today for Andy, and he's the chairman of InnoBat. He's the chairman of so many different organisations focused on electrical vehicle batteries. He, there's so much that you do. So look, why don't we go to the question of what are you doing now? How true is Wikipedia? Like, there's so much that you've done, but what are you doing today?
Well, as you know, Wikipedia is not written by the person.
No.
It's written by independent people,
Yes.
so it's a combination of things. What is true is, as you said, basically back in 2010, I was lucky enough to lead and launch the Nissan Leaf, first modern-day electric car. And so that was born, actually it was really accelerated out of the Lehman shock crisis, where it was clear that the industry had to change to survive. But it was an honour to do it, and I passionately believe that electric vehicles is a part of the future of transportation. Then, as you know, I went to Aston Martin, and I did introduce a strategy for electric vehicles there, but most of what I did there was make the company profitable and introduce the SUV, which is the DBX, and introduced the Valkyrie, which is the mid-engine car. Not very much to do with electric vehicles and not very much to do with the environment, but was about making a sustainable future for Aston. As I came out of Aston, I wanted to get back to those roots of something I was unable to do. So when I started the LEAF project, what I really wanted to do at the time, we called it zero well to wheel. In other words, net zero carbon footprint. And we couldn't do it. I failed. What I was able to do was to create an electric car, remove the tailpipe, and get to zero emissions by the car itself. But for all of those people out there that doubt electric vehicles, they're right in saying an electric vehicle by itself is not zero emissions, because you use a lot of carbon creating the car, charging the car, and disposing of the car. So to get to net zero, you've got to address those issues. So I figured coming out of Aston, I wanted to dedicate what's left of my career to that journey towards net zero. And I started that with Switch, creating Switch, bringing together Optare, the bus company, with Ashok Leyland, the van company, and creating what was a net zero company, albeit had to buy carbon credits in order to offset things that we couldn't do quickly enough. But I also became chairman of various companies in the battery space. And batteries are all around what I would call the 3 Cs. The chemistry, the cooling, and the control. And so I chair companies in each of those spaces to try to understand better what technology will take us towards a net zero future. I founded and chair a company in the e-scooter business, because the future isn't just about the car. The future is about how you combine scooter and bike with car, with bus, with train, and whatever else, eVTOLs, et cetera, et cetera. It's about the integration of things. And of course, I became a board of directors of PodPoint and eventually the interim CEO of PodPoint, because I wanted to understand how we get carbon-free electricity to charge the cars. So I tried to look at the problem of net zero from many different angles, so that when I'm advocating for something, it's not just a personal opinion, it's an opinion born of fact. And when I speak in public, I try always to paint a balanced picture about the merits and the demerits of any particular technology, because there is no perfect technology. Everything has a side effect, and you have to be cognizant of that side effect and work out what it is you do to address those side effects.
Very good. Now let's talk a bit more about the electrical vehicle space, because this is your remit, this is your expertise. And in recent times, there's an article where you said the West should learn from China's strategic EV vision.
Yeah, absolutely.
Do you want to elaborate on that? Because you've also been advising the UK government on this for years. How is that coming along?
Well, look, I sat on the board of D.A.R.E, which is a state-owned Chinese company that had a joint venture with Nissan, and that's the reason I was sitting on their board. All the way back, I joined that board very early on, and I was the longest-serving director. And what struck me at the time was even way back in sort of 2008, was the Chinese government was already saying we can't win in internal combustion engines as a country. We can only win by leapfrogging. What's the next technology? How do we lead in that? And they picked what they called new energy vehicles, which eventually became basically EVs. And they've, for the last 15 years, have consistently followed their long-term strategy to turn their market into electric vehicles. And we should both, in equal measures, admire and fear. Admire because they've set a policy, they've set a direction, and they've stuck to it. And excuse the profanity, but they're bloody good at it now, better than the rest of the world. Fear, because obviously they need to expand from the biggest market in the world, which is China, to the global market. And the Western competitors have been sitting on their hands. and frankly are not competitive, have to some extent looked at the EV space and wasted the opportunity to prepare, and now they're caught with their pants down. And basically the Chinese are able to come with cheap cars. Some of that, of course, is Chinese government supported, but that's their strategy. Their strategy is to dominate in that, particularly that, let's say, 15 to 30,000 pound range of priced vehicles, which is almost all Western car companies are above 30, and the EV is unaffordable to most people. That will change. And it'll change because the Chinese are coming. So, we should fear them as well from an industrial point of view.
Yes.
But they're coming. They are absolutely coming.
From your conversations, because you've been an advisor to the UK government, what message have you been saying to them and what has been their response?
Well, nothing that they've listened to very much. This country, to be relevant in the future, needs to build at least 100 gigawatts of battery manufacturing capability. We have one gigafactory, which I was responsible for building in Sunderland, and we have a plan for one which will basically be the supplier to Jaguar Land Rover, Tata. But it's very much at the early stages. Even then, when we add that all together, we might get to 50 gigs. So we are only halfway in terms of preparing the supply chain of batteries. Likewise, what we see is a reduction in the number of cars being produced in this country. We used to be, back in the 50s, we used to be the number 2 producer of cars in the world and the number 1 exporter of cars. Today, we're 19th. It's dreadful. We stand as an industry in the UK on the precipice of disappearing. And we're on the precipice of disappearing because we haven't invested in electric vehicles, or let's call them new energy vehicles, because I'm an advocate of not only EV but also other technologies like synthetic fuels and hydrogen. We should have a Darwinism policy of allowing those technologies to compete. But if we're almost too late. We're almost over the precipice, to be honest. And
what does that mean? Too late?
Too late means that we'll disappear as a manufacturer. Well, those 800,000 jobs in the UK, direct employees in the car industry, those people will lose their jobs because we won't produce cars in the UK anymore. Unless we start investing in the future. We're at a moment where free market economics doesn't work anymore. It doesn't work because every government in every car-producing nation is stimulating their own industry. And we as the UK haven't been doing that enough. We're in a Keynesian environment where we have to work in partnership between the consumer, the car companies and the government to co-invest in a future. That's co-invest from a supply side, but also from a buy side. So that means advocating for new energy vehicles in terms of stimulating the customer to want them because it makes sense, and supplying them from UK-produced plants. And we are a long way, and the government to date hasn't listened. And it's one of the reasons that I've worked with Labour in terms of trying to help craft their manifesto around the car industry. And my input is solely around saving the car industry. And my interest is in politics, revolves solely around saving the car industry.
And that's because you've tried to talk to the Conservative government. They haven't listened, so you've gone to Labour and
I mean, look, I would have worked with anybody. I really only care about my industry. And I see, as I say, my industry standing on the precipice. And to date, we've done everything wrong. Everything wrong. You know, in taking away the stimulus on the buy side whilst increasing the pressure on the sell side means that you eventually, by 2030, you come to a car crash. You've managed to drive away the support of the OEMs by removing the 2030 stimulus. You've not put in place the stimuli around the charging network, which is absolutely vital in order to make electric cars viable.
Yeah, because so many people that do have electrical vehicles, they're like, well, it's really hard to charge, especially if you've got a long distance journey somewhere.
Yeah, and look, we can talk around the reasons why there are many myths around EVs and why EVs make more sense than perhaps you might read in the Daily Mail or the Sun. But you have to, as an advocate of something, and my advocation is one of, we have to address climate change. It's the biggest single thing to worry about for the future. We have to do that, and EV is one of the solutions is the wrong word, but one of the mitigating factors to doing that.
And so there was also concerns about mining practices, which have been raised within the Philippines, which is the second largest producer of the nickel and the leading supplier to China. There are also cases of land grabs, vanishing forests. Rights groups say that the growth of this industry is wrecking environments, and it's harming local communities in Indonesia, the Philippines, Congo. The demand for nickel has skyrocketed since the push for renewable technologies, including the electrical vehicles. We've also got the mobile phone batteries. So, it's great that we're focusing on electrical vehicles as a solution or an alternative to helping the environment. But then on the other side, we're looking at what is that doing to these countries and to mostly people of colour who are actually, they are the cost of electrical vehicles. Some farmers have contested on unfair prices. They protested land grabbing and just refused to sell their land. And as a result, there have been threats from the police and from the military regarding that. If there was one message that you could give regarding that, what would that message be with regards to what's happening in Congo? Because lives are being lost. Mm-hmm. We've got young children who are going to work to support their family homes, and as a result, lives are being lost as a result of producing the material, the metals that are required for electrical vehicles.
Right.
What would your response be to that?
So first and foremost, as I said earlier, no technology is perfect. Mm. The internal combustion engine has been around for 150 years, and it's not exactly clean, is it? I mean, you mine oil, okay, and you burn that oil, and you create CO2 and you create particulates. Particulates poison people, particularly in urban areas. CO2 is going to kill the planet, and I don't hold back on that because it's going to kill the planet earlier than most people think. Okay, that's the background. You've got to make improvements towards that. Now, there are side effects of everything that you do. You've mentioned one of those, and there are many side effects. Some of them are mythical, and some of them are real. The thing about EVs is that you can also mitigate many of those negatives. EVs have only been around for 15 years. They're a nascent period of time. So let's talk about the batteries, because the batteries are key to an electric car. Okay, there is negatives in batteries. They produce a lot of CO2 in the way that they're traditionally made, because you have to burn a lot of energy, and if that energy is coming from coal and oil and gas, then obviously you're creating CO2. You're just creating it in a different place. So there was a study that was done by Volvo that suggested that there's about 70% more CO2 expended in the manufacture of an electric car than there is of an internal combustion car. Now, obviously, you burn less CO2 during life. So after X miles, and X is always a contentious point, you have a crossover point where it's cleaner to have an electric car than not. That's not the answer. That is not the answer. The answer is to reduce the amount of CO2 in building the car, in using the car, and in disposing of the car. Now let's talk about the mining, because you were specific about the mining.
Especially with lives that are being lost as the cost of
absolutely.
that.
Look,
Yep.
So first of all, there's a technology journey. Most batteries today use something called NMC, which is nickel, manganese, and cobalt. And we use that technology because it gives us the greatest energy density. So you pack as much energy into the battery as you can. And that's a chemistry that we've developed, and it uses those minerals that we've talked about. As we look forward, huge amounts of research going on in terms of how you can mitigate and eliminate some of those minerals. Cobalt in particular, cobalt coming from the Congo, and if you're not careful, can use child labour to mine it, which is unacceptable.
Not even if you're not careful, is it? That's what's happening.
Yeah, I think most car companies would say that they source from sources that don't use it, but let's just say it's there, and the easiest way is to reduce it. And what you're starting to see is things like high silicon anodes basically starting to reduce the reliance on those things. Also, you've got a low-cost chemistry called lithium phosphate. Lithium is lithium. I mean, it's also mined, so it can damage the environment in that respect. But that will transition, I suspect, over to something called sodium ion. Sodium is salt, and sodium is a byproduct of desalination. So you've got an evolution of chemistry, number one. Number two, and the most important thing, is that all of those minerals are recyclable. So once you're in steady state, you've mined enough materials to get into steady state, then you don't need to mine very much anymore. And in fact, the EU is quite leading in this insofar as it has a passport requirement that says that in future, all new batteries must use 70% recycled lithium and 90% of everything else. So cobalt, nickel, whatever, has to be 90% recycled. So you've not eliminated the need for mining, but you've significantly reduced it, which you can never do in the case of oil, because in the case of oil, you've always got to pull it out of the ground. So in that sense, there is a roadmap towards, let's say, using different chemistries and recycling those minerals to make sure you don't have to dig them out of the ground in vast quantities in the future. So the beauty of engineering and recognizing early the negatives in your technology so that you can work on countermeasuring them, doing what engineers and scientists do, mean that we can address many of those concerns that exist around electric cars. There are many other concerns around electric cars. They're too expensive. Yes, they are too expensive. How do you address that? Well, you address that by a proliferation of a charging network, which would allow you to reduce the size of the battery and make those cars more affordable. That's a very feasible thing to do. And if you can reduce and eliminate the carbon in building the batteries and the cars, you can certainly address the charging network with renewable energy. And we've talked about recycling the car at the end of its life. You approach net zero carbon. Now, there are other technologies that are interesting. Synthetic fuels. So the ability to take carbon out of the atmosphere, put an enormous amount of energy into it and create gasoline, put the gasoline in the car, burn it, and basically net to net is zero. Now, the problem with that technology is you're still burning stuff and you're still emitting pollutants into the air in urban areas, but it is addressing the CO2 issue. Likewise, hydrogen. My own view is hydrogen has a role probably in other things other than cars, but there's certainly areas like off-road construction vehicles where burning hydrogen is one of the feasible solutions. So I advocate for a Darwinism around technologies where you let the best technology win. But I would also say I expect that by 2040, most of us that have passenger cars will be driving electric cars, and that drives us towards addressing the current negatives that we see today, including mining.
Now that's interesting, because when you look at whether it's the UK or even a market like Africa, we've mentioned Congo, and you've hit upon the price point when it comes to electrical vehicles. And when you look in the African market, and there's so much potential that we can do from a business perspective, from a trade perspective. But when you look at the African market, they're slowly starting to pick up from an EV perspective, from an electrical vehicle perspective. But most of the consumers will go towards the used car market versus the electrical vehicle market. Would you agree from that perspective? And how do you think we can engage with the African market more from a business perspective?
Okay, so Toyota and Akio Toyoda, the past president of the company, was very vocal in saying that he thinks that the transition from from internal combustion engine to electric vehicles will take a long time. And in many respects is true. It's true because you'll see economies like China, US, Europe moving much more quickly towards electric vehicles, but other places like Africa being slower because the infrastructure doesn't exist. That said, if you think about EVs, they don't actually require a great deal of infrastructure. You can generate electricity from many sources. You can only create gasoline from oil, one source. Electricity, you can create it from solar, from wind, from rain, from burning stuff. There are many ways to market. So you can imagine in the case of Africa, where the grid is often non-existent, that you have the ability to create electricity at home. Your battery in your car can act as a backup in case your electricity supply goes down, that you can charge your car, that you can run your home from creating almost an off-grid resource. So one of the things that the electric car acts as a catalyst, not only for Africa, by the way, this is all over the world, it reduces our reliance on the grid. Ultimately, because you can use wind, you can use solar, you can create that and store it in home batteries, you can store it in your EVs, and when you need to, you can either use it to run your house or you can sell the electricity back to the grid, and that reduces your running costs. So we're just at the cusp. You can see today EVs as a cost, but in the future you can also see it solving problems that we have today, not just creating new problems.
Now, there's something else. While we're on the space of, Africa, and I was reading lots of research, and you got some US activists who are saying when it comes to climate change, which includes EV, there are so many other, different ways to help support and protect the environment. But when it comes to climate change, this particular person said that when it comes to black people, they're always on the menu. When you look at Congo and other places of colour, they're the ones doing the mining, losing their lives, but they're never at the table. The space of transportation planning and climate change is mostly white people or people of colour who aren't black. So these discussions about exploitation, they're not necessarily happening in those spaces. What are you seeing in the rooms that you're in? And I know I've also benefited as a person who has black heritage. You opened the door when it came to the electrical vehicle boardroom, when it came to Switch Mobility, which is a bus and van manufacturer focused on net zero. You invited me to join that boardroom, and I did, and we worked on that together. And so that's where I was able to have some influence and actually be part of that conversation. But what would you say to people, the majority of black people who aren't able to be in that room and speak up? What are you seeing, and how do you think we can include more black people into the conversation?
Well, it's interesting from a diversity point of view. The leading nationality in this space is Asian, not traditional white.
Hence, I said people of colour that aren't black.
Exactly.
Being a bit polite there.
But very, very clearly, the technology and the manufacturing is being led by Chinese, Korean, Japanese, and it's changed. It's changed very much the influence of the Western industries. So it is more diverse. That said, Western industries were starting to get more their head around the inclusion of Black African, etc., into more influential spaces, and basically more gender diversity as well. So we mustn't lose that in the change.
Yeah.
I also think it's important that, in the same way that I fear that till to date, the UK has not stepped forward, lent into the change, rather lent out of the change. The African nations also need to lean in. So this is not the moment to be afraid of the change. The change is coming anyway. This is the moment where nations that have that mineral capability aren't just selling it, that they're advocating for change to bring technology, to bring investment to their own countries, to allow their own population to grow in wealth. So it's about using the opportunity, not just being a slave, if I may, to the industry. It's really important, I think. And there you've got to look for betterment of your governing figures, eliminate corruption, and find leaders that will basically lean in. We are in an industrial revolution. History will write itself around this change, and you have to lean into it. You can't lean out of it. If you step back, as we see many politicians and many people in the US, in the UK, and saying, I don't believe in climate change, they are the fools. Because not only are they fooling themselves about the potential damage to the environment, but they're also fooling their friends and their family, insofar as they're losing the opportunity to be a part of that industrial revolution.
Now, on the topic of diversity, you launched the Palmer Foundation, and that's to help young people get apprenticeships within the automotive industry.
Yeah, with coming from disadvantaged backgrounds.
Yeah. So how's that coming in? How's that coming along? And why does diversity interest you? And what would you recommend other people who are interested in getting involved? What would you recommend, and how can they get involved to help with what you're doing?
So let's address that diversity question. What's my interest in diversity, whether it's ethnic or gender diversity? I'm actually, you'll hate this, but I'm not that interested in it per se. I don't look at you and say, you're a lady of colour. The point is that by not addressing diversity, not giving everybody an equal chance, we eliminate the talent. And it's the talent that interests me. It's basically looking at a problem from all different points of view. 50% of the buyers of cars are female. Why on earth would you not involve women in the development of the vehicle to help make sure that your cars are better? Increasingly, we sell cars in different places of the world. Why on earth wouldn't you use different races to enhance the capabilities and the acceptability of your car? So I find the argument, the opposite argument of being non-diverse, a really rather stupid business ethic. You've got to welcome everybody. You've got to encourage everybody. And I would go even further and say, and you know that I'm an advocate of this, but the difference between an extrovert and an introvert, you want more introverts in the boardroom as well. And so diversity from that thought process point of view is also really important.
And I'm glad you touched upon that, because I remember during the COVID years when you said to me, there's a book you recommended called Quiet, and you call yourself an introvert. You're very quiet. You said as a child you were shy. And it's funny because with the Miranda Brawn Diversity Leadership Foundation, we have our third or fourth Black Women on Board scholarship winner, and she is an introvert. She's very quiet. And there are lots of global leaders who have successful mindsets, who are quiet and who are maybe not shy. I wouldn't say you're shy, but you're definitely quiet. How did you come out of your shell? Because you're clearly outspoken now. So what tools did you use for anyone who's watching who might potentially be our next generation who are shy? Maybe they're quiet. How did you come out of your shell? Because there are advantages to being an introvert in a boardroom versus being an extrovert in a boardroom. But one of the key skills is listening, and I think that's something that an introvert and an extrovert can both utilise. But how did you make that transition from being really shy and quiet to actually having this voice? Because you are a global leader when it comes to speaking up about electrical vehicles.
Well, cars. I would only be a voice in terms of things that I know about. So over the years, you become confident in yourself and what you know. So I'm deeply wedded into the car business, and I hope that I speak with some gravitas around the car business. Normally,
well, I hope so after 40 odd years.
Indeed, 45 this year.
Oh my gosh.
I think it's important for any chair or CEO to be careful that they leave space in the boardroom for the quieter members. The benefit of a quieter member of your board is often that they create time to be more thoughtful. So rather than just speaking their mind and sort of making it almost up as you go along as part of your extrovert personality, which of course you need strong leaders, you need people that speak, you need to drag out of the quieter members of your boardroom or your executive committee, because they may not wish to simply speak up, but they probably have a very valid and enriching point of view. And so I think I'm part of that. One of the benefits of not making a lot of noise when I'm listening and I'm thinking and I'm trying to form an argument. And I often find that I'm the last contributor in a debate, because I've taken the course of the debate to order my thoughts, and hopefully as a result of now I've learned to speak, is create a guiding structure by the time that I've taken, by the framework that I've brought up in my head while I've been listening to everybody else. The point is that whether it's gender, whether it's race, or whether it's extrovert versus introvert, or any kind of other age, that everybody has a valuable contribution to make. And by allowing that contribution to be made, you're going to end up with a better product.
Definitely. And I think one of the things I do when I'm chairing a board meeting, a committee meeting, I always try to speak last so that I'm not influencing the voices and the ideas around the room. And I think one of the good things about the electrical vehicle industry, the car industry, is that they are bringing board members from other industries, whether it's the finance industry, the legal industry. And I think that's so important when we're looking at boardroom diversity.
Well, it also needs to.
Yeah, totally, 100%. That's what diversity is. It's not just what the person might look like,
and
or their
more
background.
so when you change the technology.
Yeah.
When you're producing a vehicle that is kind of autonomous to itself, you just have car industry experts. But as you move to new energy vehicles, where you've got to interact with a charging network, where you've got to interact with a communication network, where you have to play in a sandpit with other people.
Yeah.
Historically, the car industry has not been very good at doing that. It's not been very good at cross-collaborating, even between cars. Now, with electric vehicles and with new energy vehicles, have to collaborate much more, which means that you have to expose yourself to other types of people, careers, jobs. Yeah. So you need to know about how do you create electric energy? What does the grid look like? How do you make sure that you're not having to create electricity for peaks and you even that out? How does a mobile telephone network enhance your ability to move data backwards and forwards? So you have to think of so much more, and you can't do that by yourself.
Yeah. We're nearly coming to the end of this. I know we could talk all day long about electrical vehicles and cars, but so as you know, I was a senior visiting fellow at Oxford University, and I'm completing the research report, the Brawn review, on boardroom sustainability, inclusion and corporate governance. I think we pretty much touched upon this in terms of what do we need to do to make the boardroom more sustainable and more inclusive. Is there anything else apart from what you just said that you'd like to add to that?
No, the key, of course, is not simply paying lip service to it. The point is believing it. And what I learned, certainly, especially through my time at Nissan, which Nissan, got itself into big trouble as a very Japanese company. Nissan itself as a name is Japanese industry, means Japanese industry. And when we were able, through the alliance with Renault, we were able to bring more diversity in every form. I think that was the golden years of Nissan from a product point of view. So I think there's plenty of proof points that say that you have to address you have to address diversity in the boardroom. And it starts in the boardroom, but it has to proliferate all the way through. There are far too few women in the engineering offices of all of the car companies all over the world. If you go into any Western car company, you'll see mainly white middle-aged males.
100%.
And we need to say beyond. It starts perhaps at the boardroom, but it has to proliferate its way throughout the whole of the organisations.
Definitely. I know when I was on the board of Switch Mobility electrical vehicle company, and I was getting so many requests to come and speak because they were like, wow, you're a woman of colour or a lady of colour in the electrical vehicle boardroom. Can you come and share like your insights? So there's definitely more work that needs to be done there. So you clearly have a truly accomplished and successful story. The D.A.R.E stands for having the determination, the A is the action, the resilience, the energy. It's all about, this is a successful mindset podcast. Have you ever done vision boards, visualizations, anything along those lines to achieve your goals? What have you done in order to help achieve your goals?
I think whether you judge my career to be a success or not doesn't matter. I think what I've achieved is basically, number one, I always knew what I wanted to do. I was that lucky 14-year-old that knew he wanted to be an engineer. I was that lucky 20-year-old that knew he wanted to be a CEO. I'm that lucky 61-year-old that knows that he wants to contribute to the reduction of carbon. So having a vision, having a goal, having an aim, having a dream, whatever you want to do it. And secondly, there's no magic formula to achieving your dream other than you have to work at it. And what I'll say to my kids and what I'll say to your listeners is basically work, work, work. There's no lazy way of achieving your dream. You need to put everything behind it.
It's all about hard work. Now, last question. Our podcast is called D.A.R.E. What do you dare our audience to do?
I'll keep it high level, but I believe it's for everybody, which is climate change is real. We are destroying Mother Earth. We are destroying what keeps us alive. Forget the naysayers. They all have their own agenda. All credible scientists will get behind the fact that we are changing the world. I had the benefit of being able to go to the Antarctic at the back end of last year and seeing the ice cap melt. If we don't do something, it won't be a question of preparing stuff for the next generation. There won't be a next generation. We have got to get behind. And you can only do that by everybody getting behind the need to change, everybody being prepared to change their lifestyle a little bit, whether that's driving an electric car or using solar panels on your house or eating a bit less meat or whatever
totally.
That change is. We each have to play our part. And for those of us come from a wealthier environment in a wealthier country, we have to do more than those people that are coming from an emerging environment. That's our responsibility. But we all have to do something.
Andy, thank you so much. It has been an absolute pleasure catching up with you live on air on the D.A.R.E podcast, partnered by City AM. Thank you so much. And for those of you watching and listening, thank you very much for listening to another episode of the D.A.R.E podcast. I'm the host and producer, Miranda Brawn, and don't hesitate to follow, subscribe, and connect with us. Thank you very much, and see you again soon.